I don't know, maybe Liz should tell more about Sid Fox, but I know I came out here first with to work with IBM, I believe in printers, is that right? And but his degree is in physics, so he's put together a program that talks about in the beginning. He's going to run through the Big Bang all the way through to today, and why you should not vote for Trump. I think that's, but I've worked a little bit with him on this presentation, so I know about it. And my job today will be to keep him linear and not make any deviations. So Sid, where are you? No. It's on his way, Matthew. Here he comes. He's already deviating, but you've been introduced, Sid. You're on the air. You're on.
Oh, did you
running?
You ready?
Yes.
Okay. So you'll excuse my glasses. Well, cataract users know that they have to, when they have only farsightedness, they have to have an alternate way of reading stuff. And I'm really happy to be here today. And I want to really thank a tremendous number of people here. I don't remember your name. I know you. Yes.
Thanks for
Okay.
mathematics.
Okay, I think I met you at an earlier RFA thing, right? So I want to start by thanking everyone who contributed to this. I mean, like a whole host of people have like bounced this thing off unbelievably, including my friend Frank over here, who is much in the party of aliens, you know, having done some of this stuff. And I think it's a very interesting crowd. And I want to thank Jim, so David and Alan, and Jim, especially for the incredible help that he's given me in terms of cutting down the number of words on the slides, which wasn't completely successful because he didn't get a last pass on it. I tend to do things at the last minute. So, and I want to thank, you know, all the other people who have contributed to this here and online, okay? And I want to especially thank my wife, Liz, for tolerating this, knowing that this was going to end today, hopefully. Bob Hofelder, who was the first underwater archaeologist. Jeff Linsky, who was an expert on exoplanets. So you know I'm going to get a lot of feedback today. And our local Time Lord over there.
And by the way, speaking of time, you have 32 minutes.
Okay, a local Time Lord who created the first atomic clock in the world. So I'm going to get started. So in the beginning, okay, why are we calling this thing in the beginning? Well, okay. Well, first of all, this comes from a book. It's the child's first book on evolution. Great for your grandkids. Okay. So the question I'm going to deal with that doesn't always come, and I'm going to use David's cane here because it's a long one. The first question that comes to mind that I don't think is often dealt with, which is in the beginning, and that's why I use this phrase, where did our fascination with the origins of life and the universe come from since we became human? You have to you know, it wasn't Darwin who started all this thing. It went back 3,000-4,000 years, maybe even back in the cave period. People looked up and they said, where did they create? How did this get created? Like they came up with a Big Bang theory, it says, and we'll see how that plays around in a minute. But that is, so the agenda is going to be in the beginning, the Big Bang to us, okay? So this is going to be about what we know about the universe to the point that we're almost there. Okay, so that's gonna be the first thing. The second thing is going to be musings, what we thought about this and how far back we thought about this, 4,000, 10,000, who knows, maybe even 100,000 years ago. Where did all this come from? Okay. So in the beginning, the Big Bang to us, okay? Well, you know, the Big Bang happened, galaxies formed, finally our galaxy formed. And interestingly enough, as one of my friends pointed out, how come we're out there, 2/3 of the way up there? Okay? He said, I think it's because there weren't as many asteroids there to create problems. Interesting. Always thought about that. And then the question is, are we the only advanced form of life in the universe? Or at least for all practical purposes? Now, to understand that, we have to start to understand what the story of evolution as astrophysicists and astronomers and so on tell us about this thing, about the evolution. So what we have, and a lot of this stuff has come in like the last 10 years, 15 years, 25 years. Every day there was like, every month there was a new discovery that completely reversed the course of what we were thinking about. So what we now think is that the Earth was unformed in that early stages. It was sort of like almost molten, right? And another piece of a planet came and hit the Earth and peeled off something that became our moon, right? So here's the moon. It's, if you think about the planets in the planetary system, the moon, we have a single moon. It's much bigger relative to the size of the planet than any other one we ever knew about. Okay, but what might that have done? Okay, well, what unique factors might have been there to accelerate or affect evolution, the rate of evolution on a planet? Okay, there's two things that might have happened. One, scientists think that the moon being that close, and it was much closer when it was first formed, it eventually moved away and bigger. Okay, that what might have happened is the gravitational effects caused tectonic plates to form, okay, and eventually created water and land. The very important thing, if anybody knows about the Drake equation, my son said the Drake equation doesn't take that into account. Okay, so that's really important because life started here, the ocean, and then moved to land. But we didn't come along, and a lot of our fellow life forms didn't come along until we got on land, the advanced ones. Okay. The second thing was something that Isaac Asimov once had Robbie the robot tell us about, and that is, in addition to the tidal effects on, let's say, we're talking about tidal effects in the Earth. So it's in the molten parts of the Earth, right, that are beneath the surface. They cause volcanoes. Volcanoes come up and radioactive material comes up. Just enough radioactive material to increase the rate of evolution, but not necessarily, that's one possibility, but not necessarily cause the death of all the species at the same time. You got to get the right amount. Volcanic eruptions have played a big part in many, many different phenomena on the Earth, and probably helps accelerate evolution. So here's another interesting fact. Earth begins 4.5 billion years ago. In other words, we got to that stage 4.5 billion years ago. Only 200 million years later, life starts. That's pretty amazing. In that short period of time, life starts. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay, life begins. Now, this is the story, right? 14 billion, 10 billion, 4.5 billion, Earth begins. Life begins 200 million years later. Look what we go through. All these different stages. Microbes. Then we have what's called the Cambrian explosion. When, like, all these things like jellyfish and crabs and all those start to form, eventually amphibians, and then we get insects and different things they get on land, amphibians get on land, okay? Then we eventually have the dinosaurs. But what's interesting also about it is that all these periods are extinction periods in the history of the Earth. major extinctions. We're talking about 80–90% extinctions. For example, one that has a particular resonance for what's going on now is the Permian extinction, because in that case, although volcanoes also pour out sulfur, in that case, they cause huge amounts of carbon dioxide, and the whole 80% or 90% of species just disappeared, even though couldn't get enough. And the one that, of course, everybody's heard about is the asteroids that killed the dinosaurs. But you know, we didn't know about that until about 40 years ago. Okay, only in the last 40 years did we even realize that. Okay, so that's an important thing. And then in the last few seconds of the, say, of our species, of the existence of life, we come on. How does that happen?
Sid,
Yes.
the asteroid was 65 million.
Sorry, not 65.
The chart says billion.
Billion, actually, yeah, you're right. Million years ago. Very good. Okay, so all these different things happen. We go through various different forms, and here we are now today. Okay, so let's take a look at the next slide. So look at that story again. But let's go back at the first times that we have like a written record of thinking about where it all came from. Okay, I call it Musings from Early Humans to Darwin, and this is really key because it has an incredible resonance with what's going on in the world today. Let's look at Genesis. Everybody knows about Genesis, right? God creates the heaven and earth out of something without form or void. How did they look up in the sky and realize that it all started from nothing? Like, this was like Big Bang Theory 4,000 years ago. Unbelievable. What is gathered, dry land, so they understood that there had to be a separation between the two. Vegetation and plants. According to Genesis, and the stories in Genesis, and some of this combined with stories about the flood, we think that we originally were vegetarians, not vegans. That happened after the flood. Okay? Okay. Fish, bird, cows, humans in our image, Garden of Eden, this is a thing of peace, right? Tower of Babel, okay, we're ganging up on the gods, we've got to get rid of it, do something about that, okay? So different languages come about, then the flood, and God says, well, I don't think I'm gonna ever do that again. Okay, but here's what's so interesting about it. There's a second creation story. This one, by the way, originally goes back to Babylonian. And the Babylonian stories of creation and gods was much more violent. The fact that this thing has this aura of belief in things and about a peaceful period before we got kicked out of Garden of Eden and all those sort of things. That's what's so amazing about the story that I think has a resonance today. Okay. Ovid. I don't know how many people know about Ovid. Ovid was a Latin poet during the Roman period. He was the most popular Latin poet in the Middle Ages. Everybody read him, including Shakespeare. Okay. He was amazing. He studied in Greece, as many people like Plutarch did. They went to Greece to study. And he writes this book, one of his books. He believes in make love, not war. Okay, it's one of the books. They got him exiled by the Emperor Augustus, the first emperor, to the wild outposts in Romania. Okay, at the end of the Roman Empire. Look what happened. He says this is it's called the Metamorphosis, and then book one opens with the creation of the world, and it goes to the Roman Empire. Okay. This is a more modern translation, but the book is called Adam's War. Wait a minute, did they know about Adams? Remember Lucretius, the verb? Okay, so the verb, right? Lucretius knew about Adams. Okay. Amazing what people did. There was a Greek philosopher in Eastern Turkey, Western Turkey, looked up in the sky one day, said, those stars up there, they're suns. How did he know that? How did he understand that? That's what's so amazing. Okay. And there's this emphasis on the fact that of war to God or kindly nature. That means he didn't say God Zeus did this or anything. He's saying an unknown God did this. Another one of these sort of points of understanding things, okay? And then no land or sea, no man, till God or kindly nature brought order out of chaos. Okay? Man is born. This is something that goes back to Hesiod, 850 BC. Okay, very early, the same time Homer's writing, Hesiod writes. He comes up with this thing: 4 agents: gold, silver, bronze, then iron. What does he say about them? In the early age, this is talks about this, especially completely harmonious. We don't even have agriculture. All life is in accordance with all other life. What an amazing concept. Silver, bronze, weapons start happening. Iron. In the Iron Age, fratricide. Wife kills the husband, father kills the son kills the father. Maiden justice flees. Okay. Flood destroys all. Okay. And it's repaired. And what's interesting also to make the comparison between these two versions of the story, both of which go back to Babylonian, is the repair of human being is done by Noah and his wife, co-partners. They're fully in love with each other in that story. And they turn a bunch of stones at the command of some voice out of nowhere into the remains of them, regenerate the life again. So that's that. Let's go on to the next one. Jim, how much time do I have left?
19 minutes.
Okay. All right. Then there's a search for life meaning. Another thing that's going on through the whole classical period and among the Hebrews. But you remember, the Hebrews were never the conquerors. They were always in between the civilizations. That's why the prophets started saying, seek justice throughout the land. Okay, you shall beat your swords into plowshares, says Isaiah. Okay, the birth of democracy. You should read Herodotus. It's an incredible story. He's the first historian that he really gets it. Okay, and Greek playwrights, even though a lot of the Greek playwright readers like nowadays don't mention it, they kind of know that what the Greek playwrights are doing in their plays is questioning wars of conquest and civil wars. They were in the middle of a 50-year war. The Peloponnesian War went on for 50 years, okay, and almost destroyed Athens. And of course, you have the Sermon on the Mount, right? You shall love your enemy as yourself, and similar kind of stuff in Islam. And all across these civilizations, a lot of these things grew out of like Taoism, Buddhism became a major religion in India when Ashoka saw the horror that went on with his final conquest of northern India. Okay. They're born out of the disasters of war back to a more idyllic age. And that's the thing I want to emphasize as we go on to the next thing. So oh, here we go. Beyond the myth. Okay, so now let's look a little more detailed about the latest stages of evolution, how we became us, right? I'm going to talk about this. It's called babbling babes. Now, this is another thing that's so amazing, and very few people, almost no one that I know has ever read this material. I got one person interested, and he might be online waiting to and he's reading it and really excited about it. So this part of this came out of Torah study too, but this is so Erasmus. Okay, who was Erasmus? Erasmus was the lead of the humanist movement in Europe, what's called the Northern Renaissance. This is what he says 500 years ago, right? And none of the evolutionary theories, except one, which I mentioned again, address the question the questions he raises. Okay, so Erasmus. Oh, I skipped something. Sorry, going back to Erasmus. Okay, sorry. So this is book you can get online and this is the mother and the child. Okay, so what does Erasmus say? Okay, Erasmus went to England. He had a bunch of band of brothers. Again, they started a campaign against war in Europe and directed not just at the leaders, but at the people themselves, who are now all getting middle-class education because of the invention of the printing press, and especially named like Thomas More, okay, and the head of the St. Paul school who was kind of reading this stuff. He describes a newborn baby, unformed, premature in brain, okay, completely premature, babbling, what we call babbling babes, okay? This is what he says. Nature has given him, she has given a person, the baby, when they get amiable eyes, inward mind, clip and embrace, with an understanding, a kiss, coupled together, they touched each other, okay? They make their parents fall in love with them, even from the time that they realize they've conceived the baby. They're in love with them, right? Unto man has given laughter. What? Babies laugh? They weep tears? My God. That's what makes us human. That's really what makes us human, not the aggressive stuff that goes on, okay? And Erasmus then asks this question. It goes back to the Roman Stoic writers. And he says, why is man, and gives a lot of evidence about this, his own evidence. He doesn't use the word species because they didn't have it then. Why is man the only species which makes war upon itself when it grows to maturity? Animals defend, the herd thing, they have to get food, right? Okay. And really, like 80 to 90% of all creatures, okay, mammals and so on, are vegetarians. They're not meat eaters, right? So he asked this question. Nobody wants to answer this question. So now we're almost at, but this is 500 years before Darwin and Freud, right? 500 years before that. So, yeah, what is he saying? Okay, now we have Darwin's the evolution of species, right? Story about this, right? So, but out of this comes the thing, the only thing that people remember, the Bible is the best. Okay, what does that mean? First of all, he didn't get it himself. He got it from Herbert Spencer, and it didn't appear until the last edition of The Origin of Species. Darwin stressed adaptability over aggressiveness as a key factor and hinted at collaboration and cooperation, reciprocity and empathy as one another as one of the things that made species successful, right? They came early before the discoveries of the last 160 years, and a lot of which have been done in the last couple of decades, right? Look at all the different species that exist here, right? Here are whales, porpoises, and dolphins. Dolphins have the same intelligence level as human beings. They're in the water, so they can't make weapons to go kill each other, right? Why is that? Why are the most advanced species from an intellectual point of view, even they think elephants went in the water and came back out? Okay, why do they go to the sea? Okay, what about my octopus teacher? If you've seen the film, if you haven't seen it, you should see it. Okay, conversation with an octopus. Octopus only lives 1 year. They have a whole intellectual conversation. Birds, okay, dinosaurs were original dinosaurs, right? The only one that got left. Well, the parents feed the kids very rapidly. Some of them actually say, okay, let's kick the kid out and let's make sure you can fly, or she can fly, okay? Fish go around in the schools, lions and their cubs, and of course, the mother and the baby. That bond, that's so strong. So let's see what happens next. Okay, in the beginning, now we're up to how we skip the rest of it. How we became us, right? How did that happen? Okay, so we're going to talk about the babbling babes, okay? First years, okay? And this goes back to Darwin and the question of Darwin and Freud, right? Okay, so as I said, Erasmus predates Darwin and Freud by 400 years, and he poses these questions. And today's environment, which we're going to go into as we go next slide. Why did we, Lucy and the Scarlet Diamonds, went back 3.2 million years? She stood erect, right? She had a brain that was in the same range as a chimpanzee, right? So she wasn't any bigger. She's the first standing, okay? gee, they had, what tools were like the absolute crudest of tools, essentially no tools, okay? A diet of veggies, at least what we found next to her, veggies, fruit, fish and fish. That's interesting. No fire didn't come in, we'll talk about that, no meat, no grain of any sort, no hunter, scavengers at best. We didn't become hunters, as we'll see, until 70,000 years ago. And okay, so, and how far back does this go? We're gonna see it in 800,000 years when we became. For 800,000 years we survived in the same state we have now as babes born preformed with very slow rates. Okay, so what might Erasmus and Freud say about why it's so critical in our first formative five, especially in the first 5 formative years, that we move from id, which is sort of identity, getting, other than just eating food or whatever, okay, support, and successfully cross from ego to superego. This is key. First, acquire language. Children learn language like nobody else ever learned it, okay? And sometimes they learn it before they're 5 and forget it. I had a friend of mine who knew Spanish when he was 3 years old. He had to relearn it in college because he completely forgot it. And it's necessary to acquire language and social skills to ensure the future success of our society. Not the aggressive ones, and adult peace of mind, meaning mental stability. Right? How does that happen? Erasmus spoke a little about that. In the second book that he had, he actually talked about how wars start in the family and then divide itself. Very important. So let's go on and take a look at some more detail here. Prelude. Let's get the end of that evolutionary process. It's the year 65 million years ago. Don't look up, as the film said recently, right? Meryl Streep. In comes an asteroid. Dinosaur looks up, doesn't realize it, and everything gets destroyed. The volcano. Not only does it cause the destruction, but also it causes volcanoes which spew out sulfur and negative. Okay, out of that, dino birds. Okay, we didn't know about the dinosaurs being birds until the 1990s, when they discovered, oh, they're warm-blooded. Oh, wait a minute, maybe they came from dinosaurs. A lot of evidence now. Now, return of the mammals. The mammals existed before the dinosaurs. They went sort of down underground, okay? 35 million years ago. That's just about, after 30 million years after they recovered, okay? This group of mammals went back into the ocean. Okay, they came up out of land, crossed over the top, went right back into the ocean, started eating seafood, got their brains up with it. Okay. Further down that period, 23 million years ago, the first primates start to appear and spread throughout Africa. And our hominid ancestors split away 7.5 to 5.3 million years ago. This is a sort of picture. We're going to take another look at that picture more closely. This is a very busy slide from Lucy and Leakey. So the oldest one is Lucy. That was founded by Donald Johansen, who was the original head of the Institute of Human Origins at ASU. Okay, very important. Okay, here is Lucy. Okay, 3.2 million years ago, right? The time evolution. 1.8 million years ago, you all heard of Olduvai Gorge. Australopithecus appears at Olduvai Gorge. Coming up 50 cubic centimeters. Remember, this is just about what a chimp has. Okay, not very big. Then Homo habilis, which was real recently supposed to all split off from, in terms of the original, before we were actually humans or anything. 1.7 billion years ago, 600 cubic centimeters. What? Our brain's growing a little faster right now. Okay, 1.2 million years ago, Homo erectus has 900 cubic centimeters. And guess what happens? The first time humans break out of Africa. Interesting. Why did we break out of Africa? Look at it. 800,000 years ago, we have Neanderthals, our cousins. They've interacted with us sexually. We have everybody has, most humans on the earth not everyone, but have some small mix of Neanderthals. But they actually turn out to be much closer. We and the Neanderthals are the same species. We'll go into that. Out of Africa. Okay. 300 to 400. So Homo sapiens, they don't usually credit them with being like 1,000 years ago. But we do have evidence from 300 and 400,000 years ago in Western Africa, Northern Africa, Western Northern Africa, and a little bit in Spain, that Homo sapiens were already there. Okay. So, and what brings it back to 1400, that's the peak. Okay, and Neanderthals had the same size brain, maybe even a little bigger. Okay, so what happened? So this is what happened. So this blue thing is, so Homo erectus went here as far as Java, we think. Okay, we don't have skeletons, but we have tools. Okay, that indicates that. The Neanderthals and the Denisovans in Asia went even further. Okay. In this whole area, they developed bamboo. We think bamboo tools. That's why we don't find those kind of tools there. And back the earlier group, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, and so on, also spread to different places in Africa. Very important. This place, Pinnacle Point at the bottom. Okay, so but let's go back. If you think about the child, okay, I'm going to go forward here. We go forward one slide here. Look at the development of the baby. Okay, 1 to 3 months, 2 to 5, 4 to 5, 6. Finally start crawling over here, raising their hands, getting up a little. They start to stand and then they start to walk. 12 to 16 months. Anybody who's ever seen their grandkid do that? Amazing. We see it as adults, but in a certain sense, we see it again as grandparents, and it makes it even deeper impression. Look what happened to the brain at that point over that period. 25% of the final brain size of 1,400 centimeters at birth. That's why we're unformed. Okay, the first 3 years we triple that. Okay, in the very level 1. That's what goes on. So these raise certain questions. The expansion of the brain. Okay. Lucy didn't eat meat. She wasn't a scavenger even. She didn't have the tools, nothing. First of all, why'd she stand? Okay. Lucy's brain was chimp-sized. When we stand erect, something interesting happens. Our pelvis narrows. Starts to narrow. That means you can't get out from inside the mother, right? And it turns out that what we know is that when the human brain started to increase, right around here, very early, right? Still not, we weren't like, didn't have hot fire or anything else, couldn't cook meat, all that kind of stuff. Okay, when it started to expand, what happened was narrowing, okay, that took place caused us to come out unformed, premature brain size. But at a certain point, you can't get much bigger inside and still come out alive, either the mother or the child having that. And so it stops, and that's when we let them go up. But it was 800,000 years ago that we did. And that's why we today are born helpless in the same thing, because we had the same brain size we had 800,000 years ago. Totally dependent on the love of others for survival. Okay, those early years, defenseless, and also something we don't talk about. We are the weakest of species. That's why we have those shows when people do tumbling and all that kind of stuff, and have football games. We want to make believe that we're strong apes. But if anybody ever reached into a cage at a zoo and for a chimpanzee and got pulled in, which has happened, and destroyed by the chimpanzee, you know we're not pretty strong. We need some support. So how did we survive as a mother and a babe 800,000 years ago? Because it didn't happen that the Neanderthals got to that point and then we had to wait 600,000 years later. We were at the same level, okay? But what happened? When did we end up coming out on that third thing and really conquering the world that exists today? As if you remember, in other words, what happened from that final breakout when we started conquering the world, having dogs as our friends, having herds, clothing, and all sorts of other things. What actually happened? Okay, two thoughts. First of all, caves are very far apart. You don't usually find skeletons, a lot of skeletons, but you won't find them outside because it's much easier to find that in a cave, right? So a lot of the early discoveries were all in caves. Okay, so, but I mean, it's a long distance between things, and they traveled all over Africa. How did they go? How did they survive it? Well, two thoughts. One is control of fire. So fire comes into control about 1.7 to 1.5, 1.2 million years ago. We find the first cooking fire in the area of Israel, Palestine, is from 790,000 years ago. So we know that they had control of fire, not just accidental thing. Okay, so that's one thing to keep animals away.
That's your 3-minute one.
Yeah, but let's look at this. I call it being there, traveling, amazing. Tanzania, 2014. We visit this Maasai encampment. What's that wall over there? Oh, the guide says, that's made of acacia wood, and that thorny wood. It prevents the animals from coming in at night and killing our animals and us. Okay? Acacia wood. It turns out, and in the last several years, they found evidence of acacia on tools. Okay, going back to 1.2 million years ago. That's when Homo erectus left Africa. That's also when they got control of fire. That's how we survived. Okay, well, let's go back to the original thing and ask those questions again. Why is the idea of being, why is human as a paradigm, okay, humanity as a paradigm, not about aggression, but about love, okay? And why does that, what happens? I don't think we've completely answered that question, and I'm not going to try and say why we still go to war like Erasmus says, and that nobody, only one theory of evolution has ever addressed that. But why is that? Okay, why do we stand erect? Why do we want to help us? Why is it so critical that we have that initial thing overcome what happens later? Okay. Well, before I go to questions, let me just so the theory of the hypothesis of evolution that answers that best, and this is why I didn't really bring it up before, because there's always controversy about this, and all science has a problem with new ideas. When my wife Liz was taking geology in City College in New York, this was like 1962. She takes a geology course. There's like one sentence in the back of the geology thing. It says there's this very silly idea that continents, about continental drift and all that stuff, separation of the continents. That was 70 years after it was first proposed and completely denigrated by the scientific community. Okay, that's what takes time. Okay, so the choices that we have: are we going to subscribe to that all beings have a violent streak that's built into our DNA, which there's no proof of? I mean, it's just like that's what we see today happening all across America, right, in the world. Or are we going to say, you know, how are we going to bridge that gap? What choices are we going to make? And where is our vote going to get cast? You know, and where are our contributions and all the incredible stuff that people did during the pandemic of establishing businesses and feeding people and doing all these things? Where did that come from? That's got to be the dominant thing about humanity. That's is the main reason that I decided to give this talk. Thank you. Now, if I didn't bore you, now that I fell asleep, good to do questions. Man in the back, I'm sorry.
Yes, very interesting. We really enjoyed it. Question. Homo erectus, supposedly, as you showed in your map with the arrows, they spread out to Asia,
Right.
Europe, and everywhere else. You can think of why did Homo erectus start in Africa? Because, well, it was warm, easier to live there. Why didn't this happen in South America?
Interesting. I don't know. You know, there are so many unanswered questions in science and everything, you know, like everything from cosmology to this. We still don't know where 2/3 of the energy and mass in the universe are, right? Oh, we know about the Big Bang, but we can't explain all that stuff, where it came from. I don't know. I don't know how it happened. Because you're right, it's the same latitude. And you know, Africa and I mean, there were animals when we split, we know the continents split up, right? Right? Those two continents split up, and there were animals that were there. Why didn't these other species happen? I don't know. That's a very good question. We'll have to all think about that. But it did happen, and it's just one of those things that we're going to have to ask more questions. The more questions we ask, the better. Yes. Oh, Jeff, you were the next one.
I might just comment on the question of the public's perception as to whether there is light elsewhere in the universe.
So-
Public light elsewhere. And the bit of information I have is that I was asked to teach a class in a high school in New Mexico.
Right.
Remotely. Right, and which I did, and we were talking about life elsewhere, the
Right.
possibility. And I showed them the Drake equation. Drake equation basically says, what's the probability of a planet? What's the probability of a planet having water? What's the probability of that planet having, you know, elementary life forms?
Right.
Go on all these questions. And finally up to intelligent life.
Right.
So the question I asked the student, these are high school students. We went through each element on that equation. And asked them, what do you think the probability of planets elsewhere? They gave their number, which of course, we know the number now.
Right.
Essentially every star is.
Right.
And then going into more questions on what's the probability of water being, what's the probability of simple life forms being, so on. And they gave their answers, what they thought, their
Right.
perception, high school students. Okay, and then you multiply all the numbers together to get a grand total of what's the possibility of life elsewhere. And the answers they came up with were highly optimistic compared to at least what we know on.
In terms of the equations and things, right? Okay. Yeah.
That equation. So I think the public perception, at least at the high school level, is extremely high, and I think totally unrealistic.
But my friend Frank here would tell you that maybe there were aliens. But there's two things.
So
Oh,
Jeffrey, you've given us tantalizing part, they were very optimistic. How optimistic were they? What is your view via the Drake equation? So.
Well,
I'll give you a number. Okay.
Yeah.
I asked them, within 300 light years of the Earth, what's the probability of life? They came up with numbers like about 10 to 20%.
okay.
But if you look at the individual answers to the individual questions that go into the Drake equation, you come out with at most hundredths of 1%.
So let me answer that.
Way off.
Let me answer that in two different ways. First of all, from what we saw in one of those slides, the complexity of what happened over the period of time, the number of times we almost extinguished all life on the planet. Doesn't that say something? The other possibility might be that moon out there, which might have accelerated that to happen. Remember, life begins only 200 million years after 4.5 billion years the Earth forms, right? So that's one thing. But there's another thing that was in a book by Ian Morris years ago that I read. And like Carl Sagan and a whole bunch of other people, including Thomas Friedman, were part of this discussion at the end of the book. So the question came up, well, okay, how would we know that there was life, if we're an alien, on another planet, someplace else in the universe, even the nearest star, okay, which is hundreds of light years away. Okay, so that's a problem, right? Because what the discussion was, well, we couldn't know, even think, or certainly not detect any signals from an alien thing, just like they couldn't detect ours, until they invented the radio. Okay, so they invented the radio, and then, so what has it been, 100 years? since then?
100+.
100+ years since the radio was invented? Okay, we didn't even have Einstein's theory. We didn't have any idea there was a universe practically, Big Bang and all that stuff at that time. So here's some aliens looking out there and they see it and they invent the radio and they all think, well, guess what happens 50 years after we invent the radio? We invent nuclear weapons, okay? We do climate change, but especially nuclear weapons. So the discussion that went on in this book by Ian Morris at the end with all these two people who were interested in this was, even if that happened, there's a pretty good chance that that civilization was going to disappear.
Correct.
So it could never detect, so they wouldn't detect us, and we wouldn't detect them. So that was the answer. But Bob, I think you had a question.
I think you give Lucretius a bit too much credit. He borrowed it from Democritus.
Did he? Oh, you're right.
Democritus was the atomic theory about all.
Right.
By atoms.
Right.
Swerving and coming.
Sorry, what's his name? Right. Sort of made Lucretius pick up that person, but it really was Democritus. So the Greeks were actually thinking about this thing. And I mean, and going back to sort of like the societies that existed and why these questions had took place and why people said, what's war for? Why are we fighting each other? Why are we killing each other? Why are we doing all these sort of things? You know, part of it may be that our technology itself, which we think is the greatest thing on earth, right? As it gets more and more, does more and more things, isn't such a great thing after all, because one of the things that Erasmus in one of his essays and his friends did in one of the essays was say, you know what the problem is? We glorify people like Alexander and all these people. You, Charles V of the Holy, next person who's going to take over the Holy Roman Empire, don't read Alexander, because what happened was wars became more dangerous because they could kill further and further at a distance, so you didn't have to see the person you were killing. And that was one of the things they brought up as this is why we're taking this stand. But the Greeks were great. I mean, they looked up in the sky and they said, that planet says, that star's the sun, you know, all those kind of things. And the Hebrews had a similar kind of thing. And they were civilizations that were on the periphery and separate in small groups, right? That allowed independent thinking. And that's what happens with a child too. The leisure point, they have 5 years in which to just become the first humans, and they can learn so much during those 5 years. And then we have another, 15 years before they become adults. So they have that leisure kind of period, just like the ancient civilizations, to learn things, okay, and to study things from a distance and up close at the same time, which is one of the advantages they have. Yeah.
Have you thought about why so many diverse early civilizations and cultures had a flood myth?
I don't know. I mean, was it just the Babylonians that had the flood myth? Were there other ones that had it? Because that's where it might have started.
That makes some sense considering that we're talking about a civilization developed between two rivers.
The rivers that flooded.
But there's also been a lot of suggestions about the Black Sea. It might have to do with the fact that periodically there have been some significant climate change and sea levels have changed.
Yes,
People always tend to live by the sea.
right,
And as glaciers melt, people have to move away,
right.
and there's a flood.
Yeah, so that may have been, and there was some myths that some of these Greek myths started in when the Mediterranean basin flooded, opened up. It was trapped outside for a while, dried up, and then came back in. So no one knows consciousness. The other interesting thing about human beings is we don't remember. Think about it. How many of you remember something that happened before the age of 5? One, and my wife had that, a cat attacked her or something. We don't remember it. For some reason, it gets isolated in our brain, that area. And so we don't, and we can't you could interview people, but you don't want to create a terrible personality later on down the road by talking to your 3-year-old and saying, so what are you thinking today about, the universe or something like that? So that's part of the problem is we forget. But what we do have is parents and grandparents who can tell them what happened at the age of 3 and 2 and how the first time that they fall, like our granddaughter, got up off her little ledge in the family room, and she headed straight across the house to the living room. She's like, what? What did she know about that?
I'm not so optimistic as you are about human behavior. And I'd like you to try to explain why human beings exhibit a propensity for savagery. And you can pick out hundreds of examples over the last 2,000 years of human savagery where people enjoy the savagery in order to achieve some psychological benefit.
So I'm gonna step back one sec, okay? So the hypothesis about evolution that most explains almost all things like subcutaneous fat about what, and actually tries to explain why humans go to war when they get older, was a woman named Elaine Morgan. There were several marine biologists who in the early 20s and 30s came up with the idea that it wasn't just the whales and the porpoises that went back into the sea, or the elephants that went back and came out. They actually said, look at things like breasts, okay? Manatees have breasts, all these kind of things that, and said, there's a reason that we might have gone into an aquatic phase but never got completely in it. We think hippopotamuses did that. There's a whole bunch of things, really intelligent species that do that. So, but she wrote 4 books. Elaine Morgan was not a biologist, but what happened is one of the biologists, Hardy, was told, it was at the end of his career, but he was told, you write this paper or this thing, and it's the end of your career. Okay, so he did it anyway, and he retired. And Elaine Morgan picked it up and said, I'm going to do a study, and she did. And she wrote 4 books. The first one we actually got hold of in the 1950s was his father and mom showed this book. It's called The Descent of Women. It's the aquatic ape, The Descent of the Child, and the 4th one was The Scars of Evolution. And that's really interesting, because you may be right. We don't know what happens within like the first 5 years, right? And if you look at Freud's thing, and Freud has really made advances, but no, if you look at Freud, it's much darker. He involves the Oedipus complex, he involves a death wish eventually, and after World War I, he came up with the idea of a death wish. So his is much darker, okay, than let's say even Erasmus would have been, but of course Erasmus stuff would have happened when he was 3 years old either. So it's possible, and we have to go through all these things to become members of society, you might say. Go to the toilet, blah, blah, all these other kind of things. And if you handle it wrong, or if you have somebody who's been damaged later on, right, a relationship or abuse within the family and stuff, and that comes back. A lot of people say, I'm not going to do what my father did, or I'm not going to do what happened to me. And a lot of times they're very successful at least, but they're also very damaged in a lot of ways because they had all these fears and cut things and stuff. And from our grandchildren are taking all these meds and stuff. So some of that may go back to the age of 5. But another thing that happens that she points out, which I don't want you to hang around because it can be used by bad people. Okay. One of the things that Elaine Morgan pointed out was when you go into a water environment, which by the way is the easiest place in the world to stand, right? Okay, with a swimming pool, you lose your sense of smell. And what happens is we have a thing called estrus, which is the way that most mammals go through the mating period, stuff like that, is through a sense of smell. And it's built into whatever caused us to be mammals, to be periodic annually on a lunar calendar. So what happens? You lose your sense of smell 800,000 years ago or 1 million years ago, and you don't know what to do, to procreate. So you ask your friend, who's 5 years older, and he says, this is what you do. It's a learned process. Her point was, sex may be a learned process that we've inculcated into ourselves. And it may be that the 10% or 5% of, we'll use the word Donald Trump here, Donald Trumps of the world who are violent and cause this violence, all right? They're the ones that get the headlines. the 99% of us who grow up and take care of our families and do incredible things like Jesus said, love your enemy, right? Those 10%, the 99% of us who try and do really good things and change the world, we don't get the headlines. And a lot of it is accident. I mean, kind of accident, right? Like, okay, in order to get out of Africa finally and be successful, we had to have weapons like bows and atlatls, you know, with sharp points that we developed in this place in the southern part of Africa. It's the only one that came out of the southern part of Africa, at least with DNA studies, so on. But the only exit from Africa. Okay, the reason it came out of there rather than from the north, around Ethiopia, where the other two movements out of Africa took place from, is that apparently there was another period of leisure, you might call, where everything sort of dried up and got cold in the center of Africa. People were forced to this area called Pinnacle Point that was the subject of a bunch of articles by the Institute for Human Origins at ASU. And the Scientific American article was How the Sea Saved Humanity. Okay. So 200,000 years ago, they were bottled up down there. It was very rich in vegetation and all that stuff. And they could do a certain amount of scavenging, but also they had access to sea creatures, a lot of seafood, tremendous amount of seafood. Apparently, they found evidence in Pinnacle Point, we set a case in Pinnacle Point, that human beings figured out how to do heat treatment of silicas, you know, that they use for tools and points, right, before. So whereas the Neanderthals had points, but they weren't as effective in killing animals, possibly, or, you know, because they weren't sharp enough, right? So they could hunt, and we saw hunting things from Neanderthals. But what happened was they developed heat treatment, and they heat treated silica. And even 200,000 years later, the Maori, if you have an arrow point at home, the Maori still were using silicate, what they call it, silicrete, arrowheads. So they could now throw out atlatls, and they could eventually get bows and arrows, and they could kill at a distance, and they could get clothes and stuff. So the same things that made us successful, that brought dogs to be our friends and all those things, also laid the foundations. It was sort of like, you know, what are the scars of evolution?
A lot of what you're talking about relates to competition. I mean, people needed weapons to find food.
Right, not find food, what food?
Well,
Meat.
animals.
No, eat meat.
Yeah, yeah.
But most people were vegetarians up to that point. They weren't hunters until 70,000 years ago when they left Africa, that southern point in Africa. So it wasn't meat. You know, we had some meat because fire was back as far as 1.2 million, 1.5 million years. But it wasn't necessarily the regular diet. So we didn't have that kind of thing going on. And even then, why did we leave Africa 3 times?
I
Okay,
can imagine that it was not possible to generate food.
that's one thing.
There was too much competition between different societies.
Wait, let's talk about the competition point. So we were in Africa one time. Our car broke down, Tanzania. The next trip to Africa, car breaks down. They put in a call. Nobody's coming. Okay, a car starts to come by. He weighs him down. They said, "Why don't we get out and get in this other car? It's only 10 feet away. Okay, get in. It's kind of rock. It's like benches, you know. But we'll get you back there." I turned to Liz and I said, "I don't think I want to go out. 2 minutes ago, 30 seconds, we passed a bunch of hyenas. I'm not going out of the car. I'm going to stay till the morning when they come back for us." That was one of the things. When they got out of Africa, the number of dangerous species, the number of species was much lower in density, and the number of far between. So there wasn't as much danger. So they could also, so even though when Homo erectus went out, when he didn't have any sophisticated weapons, he could survive, or she could survive. And I
With
think that's part of
with
it.
that, we're gonna have to,
Yes,
our time is up, but we can, in fact, you can hear it now. So we can continue the discussion over coffee and whatever other goodies are back there.
But thank
But
you.
thank you very much.
But this audience has many hands who raise these questions for me.
No, wonderful program.
Oh, and I didn't thank my two supporters here. Ryan, for getting everything set up and all that stuff, recording everything. And Matthew, if you read the information that came